So thanks for coming on. This is great.
Yeah.
We've got a couple people in common that we know about.
Who's that?
Sean Rosensteel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think you just you did a podcast with him. He and I are good buddies. And
yeah, I just did his challenge with him last week.
You did?
Yeah, the work-life balance challenge.
How'd that go?
Oh, it was great. I learned some things. I'm implementing a couple new ideas. Yeah, it was great. We had him, interviewed him maybe 6 weeks ago, published him recently, but I jumped on the challenge to learn and grow, but also learn a little bit about challenges. I hadn't really done them before.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you know Sean? Are you in the same area?
Texas? No. He hit, let's see, my wife knows he and his wife, and I've met them through her, so to speak. So and Sean and I, both entrepreneurs, so we hit it off pretty fast in our relationship. But yeah, he's such a great guy.
Remind me, where are you at?
Portland. We're in Portland. But you grew up outside of Dayton, right?
Yeah, I'm switching over my mic. Let me get this one up. Is that good?
That's better. That's better. Yeah. You grew up outside of Dayton.
I did. Yep.
Okay. I grew up in Oxford.
Just down the road.
Right. Yeah. I was LinkedIn stalking you today, and I'm like, holy cow, he grew up just up the road from me. So that was kind of cool.
Well, and I'll give you a little bit of trivia here that connects us even more. So I don't remember, did you go to Miami?
I did not. No.
But you grew up there.
I just went to Talawanda.
Okay.
High school.
We played them a couple times in high school. They weren't in our league, but I remember playing them. So here's the question. Are you familiar at all with the big mystery at the University of Miami, at Miami University?
I'm sure there's lots of them, but I don't know if I know specifically what you're referring to.
Well, this is perhaps their biggest mystery. It goes back to the 1950s when one of their students disappeared.
Okay.
Never seen or heard from, ever.
Okay.
Ever. He was I want to say a junior or a senior. I'm going to forget his last name right now. His first name was Ron something. And he was in a hall that I think is still a building there. His roommate went home for the weekend. The last time he was seen was on a Saturday night, say 10 o'clock p.m. He went to get another set of bedding. And his roommate got back on Sunday, found his books opened up, light on his study desk. He was gone. He assumed he was at a fraternity house, so didn't raise any questions till Monday. He was never seen or heard from again. No one knows what happened. They don't know nothing. He disappeared.
Whoa.
And so here's the connection. My uncle, my mom's brother, was his roommate, the one that was his roommate who found him missing. Yeah.
Wow. That's
pretty wild.
One of the great things I love about doing podcasts is you hear some really fun stories. You've done, I think, a lot more than I have. But yeah, I love just learning about people, learning their stories. So the thing that intrigued me the most and kind of hit me right at the right time when you reached out is so this is the second connection that we know, at least via LinkedIn. I don't know how well you know her, but I start a transformational process this weekend with Boston Breakthrough Academy. And I think you know Candace Sogren. So I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Don't know her well, but know more of her kind of thing.
So also, wife encouraged a process. She said, yeah, you could really benefit from transformational change, which I think is the MO of every wife. They want to change their husbands to be better, which is fair. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about, because I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. It's one of these 5-weekend. It was supposed to be in Boston. COVID hit. Now we're doing them online. You can still go to Boston, but with distancing and everything and being a pretty emotional experience, I wanted to just kind of pick your brain a little bit about how you define, because you're what is called, I'm assuming we're talking about the same thing, a transformational coach. I don't know if that's a universal term, but anyway, I wanted to kind
I
of,
would say it's not actually. I would
Okay.
say everybody has their definition of it, but I think there's probably some themes that are going to be always consistent.
okay. Well, how do you define it?
Well, the simple version is I think people they overstate it and overemphasize it in the sense it gets bigger, it gets blown out of proportion, and it becomes like this incredibly frightening, not only frightening, but just terrifying process. But if you think, to me, what transformation is going from one way of being or seeing things to another. So it's very possible that you had a transformation today.
Mm.
You may, those moments when you go, oh, I never thought of it that way. If you choose to embrace that new way, that was a transformation.
Mm.
Now, do people go to a transformational experience like you're engaging in, saying, give me one little tweak? Maybe not, but the reality is it's all those little tweaks that create the transformation. And for me, I look at it as if I can help my clients, in some cases the world, with the message I share, see their world and their lives differently, that's a transformation. Because I fundamentally believe that when I change how I see things, I literally changed my world. I changed my relationships. And that's how fast it can happen. Now, other transformational experiences, my real big journey really started 10 years ago, where I went to a transformational men's retreat that was labeled as such, and really dug into a lot of, what was going on in here in my head, heart, and soul, and what was driving me. And I'll use maybe some scary language. What were some of the wounds I was carrying around? What are some of the messages from that? So there can be profoundly emotional, almost turbulent experiences that come from that. So there's this range, but to me, transformation is any sort of change in how I'm showing up. But the range of what that experience looks like is everything from, I didn't see that way, now I see it, to sort of gut-wrenching, opening up my soul kind of experience.
Yeah, so that's what this sounds like. What I'm about to go through. It sounds like that men's retreat, but it's not, a men's retreat where it's very much opening up your soul, figuring out what your demons are. I could be talking completely out of my ass right now, because my wife has been very good at trying to, what she calls, protect the integrity of my experience that I'm about to have. So she doesn't tell me anything. So I'm like, am I joining a cult here, or what's happening here?
Not yet. It's at the end.
Right. Exactly. So I grew up in a very religious household. And so I have a lot of those radars going off of like, this sounds oddly familiar to me, but I have seen some of the changes that my wife and some of my friends have gone through it. And it sounds a lot like what you talked about, where you kind of clear all of those demons that you've been holding on to, and apparently you don't even know you're holding on to them. And it allows.
I will say this, Nicholas, that's important to keep in mind as you go into one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like your wife has done it.
She's almost finished with it. Yep.
So I applaud her for not sharing much with you, because it really can shift the experience. So the big thing is to be open. I encourage you to be open. I hear your concerns. You used a word that comes up a lot with these, which is cult. And here's one of the things I've learned about that. It's a really fundamental awareness, though. There are similarities in that in a cult environment. A lot of times the goal is to get you to a really vulnerable state. And on these weekends and on these retreats experiences, that's also designed to get us to a very vulnerable state. But here's the key difference. In a cult-like environment, that is the moment that someone, typically in a position of power differential, tells you what to believe.
They break you down so you're vulnerable to that.
And then they feed you information or perspectives that says, now I got you. And so you're craving that. Versus these transformational experiences, it's about that awakening and that opening up, so you can learn more about yourself and you can decide what's going to be true for you, versus being told. And that's a really important difference, because there are similarities. They can seem the same because you're, like you said, breaking down the old stories. But like the group I did, they don't inject me with anything except this opening to, How would you like your life to be differently? How would you like to be different in relationships? How would you like to be different as a father, as a partner, as a business leader?
Right. Yeah. That's, I mean, it seems foundational, which was attractive to me. Is I've hired business coaches, I've hired psychologists, I've hired all these things. And what I'm excited about this is none of those things, I think, broke it down enough, nor did they give me tools to then actually what's the phrase, or actually use this transformation that I'm going through to change my perspective. And then, okay, here's how you apply this new view to the world. Do you do much of that type of work in your coaching?
That's exactly what it is today, but it wasn't in the beginning. I will tell you that in the beginning, I've been doing this iteration of my business and my life journey. This is my 12th year. Started this business in 2009. And in the beginning, it was very much what you described. It was tools and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
It was tools for sure, but they were in the box. It was the traditional box of tools. And about 5 or 6 years into it, probably it was after I began this own transformational journey for myself, I just didn't feel satisfied with it. And it felt just so superficial, like it wasn't getting to the core. It was just too much business talk. It was the stuff you read everywhere. And I realized that my life had transformed, and therefore my leadership and my business, only when I was really willing to get to the core of things. So now my coaching is very much about understand who you are, where all this comes from, understand your patterns, understand your blind spots, give you tools to navigate, but the tools are really sort of inside out tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're going to talk about the business tools if it's a business coaching environment, but we're going to make sure we get you in the best position to use those tools. Because there's so much that we do that, there's a lot of what I do is around, I consider myself a pattern spotter. I can look at people's behavior and see how there's a pattern, even though most of the world won't see the pattern. It'll seem like, well, those are totally unrelated until I pull a couple threads and they'll say, oh my God, it's the same thing. Look at how I tend to respond to these situations. Look at how I tend to react or not, or where do I get defensive or not? Where do I tend to communicate or not? Where do I tend to shut down? Where do I listen best? So once we can find our patterns and become more aware of those patterns, we can catch them faster and make adjustments.
Got it. So was there a moment, I guess, the question is how did you come across that shift of doing the business coaching tactics? That's all business. Here's how you drive sales. Here are some tricks that you can use to close more business, or here's how whatever they are. Was there a specific moment in time or specific client you were working with where you had an aha moment to make that shift?
Oh, there was definitely an aha moment, and it was with my coach.
Okay.
It was in a session with my coach. It was probably a December timeframe, because I remember it was year end and we were looking at the year in review and what's coming. And I remember we were sitting at his office as we usually did, and we had just spent, I don't know how much time looking at the year in review and mapping out some broad strokes of what we could do differently in the coming year. So it was very typical business. Here's some strategy. Here's the areas that are working. Here's some ideas to grow these areas. And we had it on a flip chart. Okay. And I had drawn circles, excuse me, because I like circles, and there's something about the relational nature of circles and they overlap. So I had these 3 circles, different areas of the business. And we sat down and I looked, his name's David. I said, David, this is good stuff. There's some really good ideas here. Is this the time for me to throw my grenade? And he said, what do you mean a grenade? I said, well, what do grenades do? And he said, they blow shit up. I go, yeah. He goes, so you have one of those? I go, yeah. So he says, well, throw it. So I get up and I go to another flip chart and I draw some circles. And what I shared with him is when it was done, I said, over here on this side is what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I'm good at it. And it's growing, and there's lots of opportunities to get better and grow more and do all the good things over here. But over here on this new chart is what I feel called to do. And this is about the transformational work. This is not corporate. This is no longer corporate speak. This is life speak. This is helping people get out of their own way, helping people not only grow their business, but grow their life and grow their relationship and grow their joy and all these things. I said, here's the problem. The old version, while there's growth opportunity, I know how that works. I know how to get paid for it. I know how to make money at it. Over here, I have no idea because I've never done that. Because I've been over here playing this old way in the box. And I'm really torn because this is the path I'm on is working, but here's this new path and it's scary as hell. I said, I'm not sure what to do. And David, this was the moment he looked at me and said, because David and I have this running joke about questions. One of my gifts is that I've honed is the ability to ask questions. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I'm good at asking questions and coming up with the right question in the right moment. And David's very good as well. And so David looked at me and said, hey, Mr. Question Guy, you're asking the wrong question, which is about as big an insult you can give me. And I said, all right, smarty, what's the right question? He said, Jeff, your question you're asking yourself is, which way do you go? That's the wrong question. And I'm going to quote him. He said, Jeff, the question is not which way to go. The question is, do you have the balls to bring them together? Do you have the courage to go in and bring all that you're talking about into the business world? Because do they need it? I said, oh my God, yes. Leaders are lost. They're trying to figure things out. They've lost their families, their relationships. They've lost themselves. They're all asking this question of, is this all there is? He said, the question is, do you have what it takes to bring them together? That was the biggest aha moment, because I remember the woman I was dating at the time was sitting there. She would come to some of the sessions, and when he said that to me, I made a sound that went, ugh. She said, what was that? And I said, that was a truth response. That was kind of my soul saying, that's exactly the question. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. That's exactly what I have to decide. Am I going to go that direction or not? And that was a decision I made that day, is I'm going that direction. I'm bringing them together. I'm going to say it was 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
That's roughly, because it was about halfway through the business, and I'm in my 12th year.
Got it.
So it was right around there.
Okay. Yeah. I think as I've interviewed, so one of my things about my podcast is I like to interview people that have kind of gone off on their own. And so I do want to get into your leap to self-employment and coaching, leaving a successful law career. But along the way, so that's step one, is taking that leap. But then step two is there is always a moment in time. I have not met someone who hasn't had this, where they've either had to overcome a significant hurdle about the 3 to 6 year window, or they stumbled into something that sent them on a different trajectory and is basically the sole reason for their success. And it's odd. Every single person I've met has gone through that. And I have no idea why that's true, because everyone is doing a different thing. Everyone is approaching it differently, but there always seems to be that moment in time. So it sounds like that was it for you.
That was one of them. Yeah. I mean, everything you just said, I had all of those. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you, I guess some of the cool things that I liked when I read about you was your take on business coaching, because you have a lot of these cool things like snow globe leadership. I have no idea what that means, but it sounds interesting. So I'd like to ask you about it. Like, what does snow globe leadership mean?
Well, it's funny how that came to me. It came to me and became a thing because I trusted. And that's something I tell people all the time, is one of our biggest obstacles, if not our biggest obstacles, we don't trust ourselves. And we don't trust the things that come to us. We don't trust the ideas. We don't trust our instincts. Because the idea about the snow globe hit me while I was on a stage speaking about 3.5 years ago. I hadn't planned it. I didn't think about snow globes before that. I don't even think I owned a snow globe. And this idea of a snow globe came into my head on stage. And I've learned that when something comes to me, I just share it. I just trust that's what I'm supposed to say. And what came out of me has evolved, and I'll do the simple version. It seems to be very memorable. So if you think about snow globes exist for really one reason.
Shake them up.
Shake them up. Exactly. That's why they exist. That's why there's fluid in there. That's why there's something that moves around. They're not intended to be a piece of stationary or stagnant art. And yet what I learned is that people who have snow globes almost never shake them. And the reason they don't is because it's good enough as it is. It's pretty enough as it is. And so I call the snow globe the metaphor of leadership in life. Is number one, we have to be willing to shake things up. And that's about ourselves. We have to shake things up inside ourselves, shake up our perspective, shake up our actions, shake up our thinking, be willing to get uncomfortable and disrupt ourselves in order to create this external change. What I've also learned is that when you shake a snow globe, and I didn't realize this the first time I shared it, it just came together, is when you shake a snow globe, as soon as you stop shaking, every snow globe does the same thing. It immediately starts to settle. And that's the word. It's great as a speaker because I can say to an audience of whether it's 100 or 1,000, what happens as soon as you stop shaking? And they all yell, it settles. And that's the point. That's what we do in our lives and our relationships and our businesses. It's good enough. So we don't do anything about it because it's good enough. We settle for okay. We settle for average. We settle for good enough. So my message is we've got to shake things up, and we also have to create some fundamental shifts in the shaking. Because with a snow globe, if you shake it up, when it settles back down, nothing is really different. Whatever's inside hasn't moved. All that's changed is the position of the sand or the snow or whatever it is. So we've got to willing to shake things up, but we also have to change. We have to change our perspective, change our action, change our thinking. And if we do that, we can continue to create really positive impact all around us. And the other thing I share about it that's evolved, Nicholas, is this. I'll get up in front of a group and I'll just start shaking the snow globe. And I'll ask people, how many of you are uncomfortable watching me shake this? And a lot of people say, yeah, that's a lot of shaking. I'll say, well, my friends believe that I have a contraption that I put my arm in at night because they actually believe I shake my snow globe while I'm sleeping.
You have a shake
That's not true. Pardon?
One of those shake weights so you can keep your arm.
Well, shake weight. I said, no, I don't do it when I'm sleeping. But the point of that is, I said, what I've learned about shaking things up is we don't get stressed when we shake our own selves up. The stress comes when someone else shakes us up, when external situations shake us up. And I'll close with this thought about the snow globe, because during COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people have said, Jeff, frankly, we don't need to do any more shaking up. Right. I said, actually, you're wrong. I said, you're completely wrong, because right now we need more internal shaking to deal with the external shaking that's happening to us. Because when the world around us is shaking us up, trying to remain like sort of freeze up is not going to work, because we're being shaken. We've got to shake things up. We have to shake up. How am I leading today? And how does it need to be differently? Lead differently? How am I interacting differently with my partner, my team, my children, whatever it is? I've got to shake things up even more right now. So that's where the snow globe came from. And I will say this, it's really memorable, because typically people meet me once and hear that, and it could be a year or two later and they'll just go, hey, you're the snow globe guy.
Snow globe guy.
I'm the snow globe guy. My license plate says snow globe.
Right. It's not a bad thing to be known for. No. That's good. How has, I can imagine that your line of work has benefited immensely from COVID. Am I wrong in that assumption?
You are incorrect.
It has not benefited?
It has not benefited. It's just the opposite.
I would think that successful entrepreneurs, the ones that have their head in the right space, would be using this as an opportunity to either better themselves, the ones that haven't been completely decimated financially. But I look at even big companies, big companies are going through immense transformational changes, where they're closing offices because they just don't need them anymore. They're getting the same work done at home and people like it. However, I wonder what the long-term psychological impact of those decisions is going to be on teams, on how we interact with one another in the office, the quote unquote office now, because it's not a thing. I had assumed that companies would be trying to, maybe it's early, maybe I'm asking the question early, but so I guess what has been the impact of COVID on your business?
Well, there's been two primary impacts. If we're gonna choose labels, I don't like labels because they're so confusing. Like the word positive and negative, what does that really mean? I'll call them negative.
Okay.
Pre-COVID, about 60% of my business was speaking in person at events, conferences, and such. Those have virtually disappeared, and people say, well, there's this virtual conference here and there, but what they don't realize is that's a very small percentage of those groups that used to have live speakers are actually doing virtual or hybrid events. It's a very small number, but they see them, so they think there's a lot. The other thing is those events are much shorter in time because you might do a 3 or 4 day conference. If you do it virtually, you're not going to have people on calls for 8 hours a day like you would at a conference. So they need fewer speakers, and their budgets have dramatically dropped because they're not charging as much money for their events. So the speaking business was decimated. In fact, one of my best friends is a very high-end, prolific speaker. He closed his business in June.
Whoa.
And he said, I probably won't reopen my business at the earliest for 3 years because he speaks at big conferences of 5,000 or more people. He said, those aren't coming back for who knows. So that was one big impact, was the speaking. On the coaching side, you would think just what you said is you would also say, hey, people are really disrupted by this COVID pandemic. So as a result, they need some form of support, like through coaching. But the reality of what's happened is, and what I've been talking about for the last 8 months, Nicholas, is this: emotions are natural. The problem is we tend to be guided by our emotions without staying aware of what those are. And the biggest emotion that has really confronted us over the last 8 months is fear. And there's tons of decisions that are being made from a place of fear. And when we're afraid, we have one natural reaction. It is either to avoid or to completely lock down. Sort of the duck and cover. We're going to protect ourselves. We're only going to take care of the things we have to. So from my experience has been the last 8 months, very few companies are proactively saying, we want to work at improving our team. We want to improve our culture. We want to improve our leadership, even though it is the perfect time. I agree with you. Right. Because there's other opportunities here. There's such a demand for different leadership today than we needed 9 months ago.
Oh, for sure.
But because of that fear mentality, so many folks have just gone to, let's make our decisions. We have to. Let's do what we believe we have to, setting up remote workers and such. And now we're just going to try and ride this out. I am seeing in the last 2 months or so an opening in that of more conversations and engagements of people saying, I think part of it is they're realizing that not that we're near the end, because who knows what the end is. Right. It's almost like, imagine you're holding your breath. Like when you get afraid, you go, well, how long can you hold your breath? Apparently it's about 6 months.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Because at 6 months, you sort of go, ooh, you release your shoulders, you relax and say, okay, so what are we going to do different? Even if this is our new reality for the indefinite future. So I'm starting to see a shift, but I wish it had been what you had said. I think the biggest problem, as I said, is we're driven by fear. And fear is not the problem. The problem is we're not aware that we're making fear-based decisions. We think they're logical decisions, but they're logical based upon the fear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's perfectly logical if you say, I'm afraid. This is what I would do if I was afraid.
Right. Yeah, that gets pointed out to me on a daily basis. Both my wife and I work from home now. She's got a big corporate career, and I'm a self-employed individual, and so we've had to figure that part out. During the lockdown was really tough with kids home, me having the flexibility to man them for the most part, that was extremely difficult because the financial world was collapsing. And so I had to juggle that, as I managed clients' money, as well as the kids and the family. And, and looking back, there were a lot of decisions made purely out of fear. And I'm terrible at recognizing those right off the bat. But I think what I assume is that I always trust that there are successful business people that maybe their curve is a little bit shorter than mine in terms of recognizing those things, which is partly their success is to blame for that. But I think I just might be early in my assumption. I think people, as I've talked to more and more business leaders, it seems like they're starting to actually look at the future and starting to address some of these changes. I just, from a corporate office standpoint, boy, I see that being a real big psychological hurdle for companies as they talk about corporate culture. Because I heard you on a podcast talk to someone about culture, and how important it is, and how it's already there, and it's not something you can just create, but it's something you have to foster over a long period of time, and you have to be intentional about what your new culture is. And I don't see anybody doing that yet.
Well, culture is a tricky topic. I think it's misunderstood. And to your point, so many people think about culture as being in the place. It's attached to the place and how we're around each other. I know we're going to get back to more in place working, but I don't know if it's ever going to be the same. I doubt it will ever be the same. And there's a belief that says you can't have a good culture when people are remote. And what happens is they therefore assume that if we are working together, we have a good culture. Well, that's not true at all. That just means you're working close together. One of our guests one of my favorite podcasts is number 15. I've referenced it so much, I know the number, and we've done like 70 now. A guy named Larry English founded a company called Centric Consulting. It's a very high-end business analytics, IT technology consulting firm. They get 1,000 people today. Their culture is just incredibly good. It's a family atmosphere. They care about each other, high levels of trust. They've never had an office ever. And they've done that with a remote workforce. And so I'm not saying remote is the answer, but I'm saying that culture is so much more than just whether you're working together or not. And the other thing I want to offer, because you brought it up, Nicholas, is this. You talked about fear. I have an offer to you of a different way to address fear. And it's for your listeners as well. And I told you, I tend to look at everything differently, and I'm big on questions. And we have to change the question, because most of us, if we ask ourselves, am I afraid? So if I said to you, are you afraid of something? My guess is your initial gut reaction is to say no.
Well, I'm a man, so I'm always going to say
exactly, especially men. Exactly. Good point, Nicholas, especially men. My gut response is no. So if I ask myself, am I afraid? Pretty good chance I'm going to tell myself, nope, must be something else. No, I'm not afraid. I'm just procrastinating.
Yeah,
procrastination is an outcome of fear.
Yeah, I approach it like, for me, when someone says, are you afraid? The first thing I think about is physical danger. And so I look around, I live in a pretty nice neighborhood in the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Riots, all that stuff is so far away from us, you wouldn't even know it's a thing. So no, I have no fear of my surroundings.
Right. But the fear that stops us is our emotional fear and our risk fear and our, am I going to get hurt here? Am I going to be accepted? Am I going to appear good enough? Those kinds of fears. So I changed the question. I realized that we're a fear-based being, because we're human beings. Mm-hmm. So I never ask myself if I'm afraid. Whenever I'm engaging in a behavior or not engaging in a behavior that doesn't make sense, my question to myself is, what am I afraid of? I assume I'm afraid. And when I say that, I usually get a really clear answer, because I don't get, oh, no, you're not afraid. It's, oh, thanks for the permission. Yep, I'm afraid this is not going to be accepted by someone. I'm afraid they're not going to get it. I'm afraid they're not going to get me. So I go to the affirmative statement. What am I afraid of versus am I afraid?
I like that. I'm writing that down, because Yeah, like I said, I get distracted by vague questions. You know, I'm extremely ADD. I have spent my entire life trying to solve that problem without medication, and you know, I do it via. I generally have a hard time looking people in the eye because one of the tics that I have developed is if I look off into space, I can stay mentally focused on the conversation I'm having. Um, but when someone asks me a vague question, man, my brain just goes in a million different directions. And so when it's specific like that, like, what are you afraid of? Well, of course, I could probably make a list of, you know, as an adult with kids, you know, the fear of my kids' safety. You know, I'm the guy at the playground who's on the corners checking sight lines, got my arms crossed. I'm like, okay, where's the van? You know, where is it? Is it pulling up yet? You know, are the abductors coming? You know, I'm just terrified of that. And it's totally nonsensical, but yeah, I like that. What are you afraid of?
And the second, there's a two-part to this, Nicholas. The second part is whatever answers you come up with, don't trust the first couple of answers. Typically, the real truth is at an answer level 5 or 6 deep. Because what I've learned is that when we do acknowledge our fear, typically the first fear we mention is the biggest, baddest, most incredibly horrific, and the least likely. And it's least likely. So like when I work with clients or friends, if they're willing to hear my questions, not all my friends are, I'll say, okay, so what are you really afraid of? And I'll usually say something like, well, that's probably not it. So what? So what if that? And we get down to the core. And let me give you really two quick examples because I think this makes it visual. One is in the business world, one's personal. So in the business world, when I'm encouraging my team members or a client to speak up, to just speak up about an issue, I'll say, so what are you afraid of? And they'll say, oh my God, if I speak up, I'll get fired. So I found this really simple tool. I call it the restate or the flip. I flick it back to them. So I repeat what they said. I said, oh, so you're afraid if you speak up, you'll get fired. 99 times out of 100, their response is, you know what? Yeah, I probably won't get fired. But that's what they thought it was. And that's the big obstacle. So we said, okay, so what are you really afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to be seen differently. I'm not going to be respected. I'm going to get sabotaged, all these things. And I keep doing the playback to get down to what's really going on. And often it's going to be a really uncomfortable workspace. And I don't want to shake things up because I could lose opportunities at advancement or whatever. But usually their answer is something about how it's going to impact them emotionally. I'm going to feel uncomfortable every day. That's a bigger fear than I'm going to get fired. So the second one is in a personal situation. I won't give names, but a friend of mine a few years ago called and was really struggling in his marriage and was struggling in communication. And I said to him, I said, so what are you really afraid of? He said, I'm afraid I'm going to get divorced. I said, yeah, that's not it. I mean, he's a good enough friend. I could just cut to the chase. I said, that's not it. He goes, yeah, it is. I said, no, it's not. What are you really afraid of? He said, well, like what might happen to my kids from that? Like, what would that be like? I said, yeah, that's not it. He goes, my kids, Jeff. I said, I don't think that's it. What are you really afraid of might happen? Well, like, what's my family going to think? And all. He goes through this whole thing. Finally, about the 6th or 7th question, that's why I say that's about the right number. He said, I guess what I'm most afraid of is that if I get divorced, I'm going to be alone forever.
Wow.
Because I have this relationship and it gives me a sense of belonging and of self-worth. I'm going to end up alone. And you could tell his voice changed. Like he changed just the way I said it. I said, yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, cool. So now he says, because now we know that the issue is not about the relationship. And that tells me he's going to engage in that relationship from a perspective of protecting himself, which means he cares more about himself than the relationship. How's that going to go? Probably not too well.
Ball of fire is what that sounds like.
Right. But once he understands that he's taking care of himself, he can choose to set that aside and say, that is true. But you know what? I really care about this relationship. Let me interact Because think about this, interacting with your partner from a place that your real fear is you're going to end up alone forever. That's not going to go well. How are you ever going to open yourself up and be vulnerable? Because you're constantly going to protect that relationship. The relationship won't get better. You're just out to protect the relationship and your sense of self. So those are a few things to think about around fear. See, right there is transformation.
Right.
When you see how fear is differently, you start to understand how fear is driving your decision. That's a transformation, because now you have the ability to do something about it.
I love that. I mean, it's tough, and it kind of dovetails a little bit into, with a lot of my guests, what I like to really understand was what was that moment that made you stand up from your desk, give your boss the proverbial finger, and walk out and just go at it on your own. That's always fascinated me, because I did it. I have friends and family that have expressed, extreme dissatisfaction with their current jobs, and they all have great business ideas, but they're all too scared to go do it. And so what are some of the things that I think you could tell someone like that, or what did you go through personally when you did it? You had a successful law practice. What was that jump like?
So I've done it a couple different times in different ways. And the outcomes were all different. That's the thing. We don't get guaranteed outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to have a guaranteed outcome. And real quick, what I would add is, one of the things people, I think, are missing during this pandemic, which is driving so much of the emotions of fear, of anger, and of sadness. Typically, those are the big three. Joy is not on top these days. Mostly fear, anger, and sadness.
And inebriation.
Well, the inebriation is the form of coping with those emotions, right?
For sure.
What the pandemic has taught people, and I think most people get it, is that we control almost nothing. I knew that already. So this pandemic has not hit me that hard. I've had a lot of challenges in my business and some personal challenges, but it hasn't hit me hard emotionally, because I already knew that I didn't control anything. That was one of my big transformations. I've learned I only control me. I influence around me, but I don't control any of that. But COVID basically said, hey, Nicholas, yep, as of today, you don't get to go where you want when you want to go. You don't have access to going out to dinner. Your kids don't get to go to school. You don't get to go to work. In fact, you don't even get the toilet paper when and where you want it. I'm going to take every bit of control you thought you had and take it away, but it was never there. It was a fallacy. And so people have struggled with this to really grapple with that. We don't control things. And when we're out of control, we tend to feel stressed, but we're trying to control things we don't control. I mean, that's what I tell people about stress. Stress only happens when you're trying to control something you don't control.
Interesting.
Because when you control it, you take action on it, and we're generally not stressed when we're in action to change it. We're thinking about things we don't control. So to that point, if I go back to my first big leap, I was a lawyer. I worked for a big corporate law firm. I became a partner in that law firm. So in many worlds, you're set for life.
Right.
But the thing for me is, I got to that point. I was right on target, right on time in my plan for, I was 33 years old, exactly on target. I achieved my life's goal, partner in a corporate law firm. But then I said, what now? And a lot of people don't ask what's now. They achieved their goal and say, I'm done. To me, it was, no, what's next? And I realized that what I really wanted to have a role in leadership. I want to be a part of the business, not just the practice. And I looked at that firm, and I looked at the leadership, which was a committee, and looked at my 8 years and said, they're never going to let me in that room. Because I played back the things I had heard over those 8 years, that I'm a troublemaker, that I ask too many questions, and I'm always challenging how we do things. And I said, well, isn't that the idea? They said, no, not really. You're kind of a pain. I saw that there was a difference in values. I was repeatedly asked this question: why do you spend so much time with the staff? I said, well, because they're great people. But there was a belief that there was a better, we're better than them. So I said, I'm never going to lead here, and I don't want to lead here. So if I want to lead, I got to go create my own thing to lead. So to me, it wasn't a matter of like, it wasn't the finger to them. It was just, well, you're not going to let me lead, so I'll go create something to lead. That was like so obvious to me. And it took a little while to get it set up, and I left. And I started my own practice, and I had a vision to create my own firm, and that all happened. So I took action towards my goals and dreams. And all that felt easy to me. It wasn't easy. I mean, there was a lot of hard work and blood, sweat, and tears, but I was just creating the reality I wanted that I couldn't get there. And if I can't get it there, I'm going to go create it somewhere else. That was like not even a thought to me. Now, however, though, so here's where it changed, though. The next big leap was a significant one, because I worked in the big firm for 10 years. Then I had my own firm for 7 years. And about 6 years into that 7 years on my own with my own firm, I started to get unsettled again. And at that point, everything was great. The firm was awesome. We had great clients, great team members. We built it like a firm or like a family and a business. We had good culture. I was making a lot of money. I had a life. Most lawyers don't have a life. All they do is work. I had it figured out. I beat the system, except I wasn't happy. So I asked myself, why aren't you happy? And I realized because I didn't like being a lawyer. What I loved was building the business. Most lawyers don't want to build a business. They just want to practice law. I realized that what I loved was building the business, not practicing law. And when I couldn't figure out a way to just do the business side, I said, I have to leave. And I took another leap, and I left to go find what was next for me. And when I decided to stop practicing, I didn't know what was next. A lot of people say, I have to figure out what's next. Not me. All I know is I can't stay here because it was killing my soul. It wasn't where I was supposed to be. So I'm leaving, and I'll figure it out. And I did figure it out. I got involved in a coaching franchise. And 3 years later, I was out of business. I crashed and burned. I had my first major failure in my life.
What?
And I look back, and it taught me so much, because it taught me wisdom. It taught me what it means to be humble as a leader.
So I'd like to back up just a little bit, because that's a huge realization, is I don't like the work I'm doing.
Yep.
You know, I'm good, and you identify what you're good at, what you're passionate about. What, if you can remember, what led you to choose a franchise rather than just hanging a shingle?
That was simple. That was really a simple decision. The same reason a lot of people do franchises. I said, why should I invent the wheel when I can borrow the wheel or pay a licensing fee for the wheel? This was a group that said, we have the systems, we have the marketing. And you know, that was a big learning lesson. Because when I look back about what they were able to deliver on and what they weren't, I should have seen it coming. I don't like using the word should. I could have seen it coming, because they had systems, but the systems were only as good as that part of the business. So the franchise decision to me was purely, like a lot of franchise owners, why am I going to create the systems when I can buy the systems, or I can rent the systems and license the systems? And basically the other thing was, when I found out about that opportunity, it's when I wasn't sure where I fit. And I said, oh my God, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to help business owners build their businesses and have a better life. The problem was, yes, there were flaws in the system. There were flaws in the franchise system. There's all sorts of, there was a horrible economy at the time. But what I realized, and it took me 5 years to admit it though, it took me 5 years after that business failed to publicly admit the real truth. The business failed because of me. The business failed because I was arrogant. The business failed because I had looked at my past career, and I built this law firm, and I was a lawyer, and I created this business and law success. And all I figured out, all I had to do was show up. All I had to do was have a phone number, and people were going to call me. And I networked and said, everybody knows me. Everybody likes me. A lot of people love me. But the phone didn't ring because I didn't do the things to get the opportunities. I was just waiting for someone else to say, I want you. I didn't do the work. And I got, a few years ago, a gentleman I know through one of my men's organizations experienced me and said, Jeff, you have a big presence, but there's like this humility to you. And he said, what I've learned is people who are humble either grew up that way or got humbled. I said, oh, I can tell you which one I am. I got humbled. Yeah. I got a smackdown. But not only did I get smacked down, I was willing to get up with humility.
Right.
Because that's one of the things I talk about with growth. We do not grow from experiences. We grow when we choose to learn from those experiences and to be vulnerable about our learning through those experiences. People have gone through experiences and didn't learn anything. A lot of that's happened during COVID. People have gone through this and they have not changed anything about how they do business going forward. They've changed the pieces a little bit. You know, they've done what they had to in their business, but they haven't fundamentally changed how they see their people, how they look at their team. And when this is whatever over is, they're going to go right back to the way they led before. Right. They're not going to learn anything from this because learning is intentional and learning is vulnerable.
When you say that, you kind of made a comment, if I could back up, because I do want to talk more about what you just ended on, but early on you talked about when it came to choosing a franchise, you kind of chuckled and said something to the effect that, you know, I'll never make that mistake again, or, you know, and it's just kind of a question for those considering franchises, because I don't want to crap on that whole model, but honestly, it's, unless you're, I guess, maybe in a restaurant, I still can't figure out, is it because it's marketed as easy, you know, quote unquote easy, is what's attractive about it? You know, the franchise fees, I went down the road of looking at a franchise. I was going to open a daycare. I'm very fortunate that I sidestepped that landmine, especially in a year like today, or a year like 2020. Because it was like, okay, the things I'm not good at is marketing. The things I've got a lot of lists of things I'm not good at. And the franchise seemed to offer up solutions to that I had not considered, or that I just knew that I wasn't gonna be able to do that. You said that you learned from that. You know, is that something that you would never do again? Or if you look at people that are considering it, I guess, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, absolutely. My simple advice is this. To answer your first question, would I never do it again? No. In fact, coincidentally, I just was talking to someone last week who has a franchise that might be an interesting add-on to what I do. So I'm taking a look at it. So I don't have an issue with franchises. What I learned is, and I'm going to simplify this as much as possible, because you hit on the key term. Nothing sells itself. Let me reframe that. 99% of things do not sell themselves.
I was gonna say chocolate's one of them.
Well, but no, because there's people who have chocolate businesses that don't survive.
That's fair. Yeah.
The 1% are some unique brands. If you get things like location right, there's a lot of misnomers and misunderstandings of franchises. Typically, you know, franchises exist because they've created a system. And they offer marketing materials, but marketing is not sales. You still need to figure out how are you going to get someone who wants to pay you, whatever that is. Whether, you know, most people think of franchises as food places, you know, McDonald's franchise. Well, take a look. Almost all McDonald's franchises are successful.
Right.
That's true. Because their brand is so strong and they provide enough support around the location and all that. What people don't realize is that McDonald's makes more money in real estate than they do from their franchise fees. Right. They're a real estate company because they own the real estate, which is the greatest asset. But the other reality is, how much does it cost to get a franchise? I don't know today. I know, God, 10 or 15 years ago, it was $1 million.
Yeah, it's like $2.5 million now.
It's $2.5 million. So yeah, if you pay that kind of money for a franchise, you look at Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is a fantastic franchise in terms of how they do business, the quality of their food, all those things. But their model is set up that you've got to invest heavily before you make money at it. You know, you might not make any money at it for 3 or 4 years. And then if you do well at that, they're called operators, not owners, you can make a lot of money. People think of Subways. But if you look at most people who own a single Subway, the owners, they're making sandwiches.
Right.
It's not a business that's beyond you. It's a business you work in, and you got your family working in it, which is fine. Most people who make a lot of money in franchises like that, they own multiple franchises. They own 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 Subways. So the key here is and this is what I've learned about so many things. I've published 4 books now, and I've gone through all the different, I've had a publisher, I've self-published, I've done it all. And everybody wants to tell you, we're going to market your book. But the truth is, only you can really market your book. Only you can really sell your business. So the biggest thing I would say about franchises is understand that nothing sells itself, and all the marketing in the world doesn't close business. So all the marketing materials don't matter if you're not willing to use them and use them well. That was my biggest lesson. Now, there was a couple other things that were specific to that franchise, but that's the biggest one, is that you've got to be willing to do the work. It's not success in a box. It's systems in a box.
That's good. I like that.
I've never said that before, so I may want to remember that one.
Yeah,
franchises.
That's great. That's perfect. It's not success in a box. It's systems. Yeah, because that's the whole thing with franchises. Their value is their process manual, and really nothing more. It's for people that don't want to develop one on their own. And it to me, it's as long as the financial hurdle isn't so much that you're putting your entire financial future at risk. Franchises seem to be a great place where a lot of learning can be done in a relatively safe environment. As long as you stay within the rails, you can start learning about some of the things. And one of the things you pointed out when it comes to is the work. When you talked about, you had that aha moment as I wasn't doing, the reason your franchise failed is because you weren't doing the work. Can you talk a little bit more about how you define the work is?
Yeah. The biggest piece for me was, in that case, was about just the process and the commitment and the risk of selling. I thought, because I didn't do a lot of what I considered selling when I was a lawyer, and I had all this business come to me. But I realized that I had created a unique business, and I had built relationships that fed me, but I didn't have any of those, because one of the mistakes I made was saying, well, people see me as a successful lawyer, even an entrepreneurial lawyer. Therefore, they're going to want to hire me to help them grow their business. What I didn't anticipate was, well, why would they think that a lawyer can help them grow their business? And a lot of what was going on is people actually, and I learned over the years, like people say, Jeff, it must be so awesome to tell people you're a lawyer. I said, not really. Not in the business world, because if I go to a president or a CEO of a company or an owner and say, hey, I can help you grow your business. I used to be a lawyer. They're going, well, what the hell you know about growing a business? You know how to be a lawyer.
Used to be.
So it feels good. Like it's like you have this credential and all this education and you passed the big test. But in the business world, I never highlight that I was a lawyer, because it really wasn't a selling point. So I didn't do the work of that. And I think that's a big issue in all businesses, whether it's a franchise or not. So many people get into business and they say, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to outsource the sales process. Because they're good at something, but they're maybe not good at sales. They're good at whatever they deliver or whatever they create.
Sure.
But I'll tell them, I said, that almost never works. You have to sell it. You have to learn how to sell it. And then once you have successfully and consistently and predictably sold it, then you can get someone else to sell it.
Right. Because then you can train them.
But you have to figure this out. Sales it drives the engine.
Right.
And most organizations, that's the biggest, they've got a great product or a service or whatever it is. I'm sure it's great, but they haven't been able to or been willing to take the risk of what it takes to actually sell it. That's the work to me.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the last job I ever had, is what I like to call it. Before I went off on my own I was brought in because I knew how to sell. And it seemed like very few people in the firm did. And that's when I learned also, was my big aha, is I really hated making other people rich. It's like, you're not paying me enough to do this thing that you don't know how to do. So, so yeah, it was time for me to go off on my own and do that. So,
Hey, Nicholas, I'm going to add a piece here about what we're talking about, because we were talking about franchises.
mhm.
I think there's an interesting time coming, and I hope I want people to think about this, because I'm thinking about it even where I am in my business. Typically, when people think about going into business for themselves, they either think about starting from scratch as some sort of consultancy. You know, there's something I do, there's some wisdom in me, whether I'm a coach, consultant, whatever. I'm going to go sell my time. And it tends, and that's okay if that's what you want to have. Maybe it's a lifestyle business. If they think about a business, they typically think about buying a franchise because it's in a box. We think success, but it's really systems in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we think about, and very few people actually think about starting a new business that they're going to build. On a percentage basis, that's small. I think there's an opportunity, especially over the next 5 to 10 years. And I could be off on my numbers here. We had a guest on our podcast about a month ago who was talking about this. His name is David Wolf. And the fact that over the next 10 years, there's something like 850,000 small businesses, small to mid-sized businesses that are going to be looking to be sold or to somehow cashed out by their owner, because these are the baby boomers and a little of the next generation who may not have a succession plan. They don't have someone to take it over. And the estimates are that less than a third of those will actually be sold, because the people are going to need more money than they're going to be able to get. And David was saying he sees the next 5 to 10 years as an incredible opportunity to go out and buy businesses for minimal investment.
Oh,
and that's not a get rich quick idea. It's a reality that you may not have to put a lot of money into these businesses that have been operating for a while.
mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm telling people to direct their attention. And I think we're going to see a fundamental shift in that direction, more so than the growth in the franchise industry, because there's so many opportunities.
Yeah, and you're already seeing it now. That's where a lot of private equity dollars are going, is just to gobble up businesses. You know, they're starting, I think, much higher than a mom and pop store. But I spend a lot of my time working with clients who are business owners, and they have no succession plan. And the thing that I haven't figured out yet, because one of the things that I'm working on is starting a leverage buyout fund, where it's going to do this exact same thing, is create a process for people to cash out. The issue that I've seen in my experience has been, and you pointed to it, the owners tend to not have a realistic value of what their business is worth. And it's hard to get them to come back to reality of, here's how we value a business. And we 100% realize and acknowledge your literal blood, sweat, and tears are on the floor of this company. But the new owner doesn't care about that. And so I wonder if you've thought about how to help them get in line with that. Because I've seen it time and time again of the owners' valuations here. They have an offer here. And as a financial advisor, I'll say, if you take this offer here, you're set. Like, you're good. This meets all your needs. But that ego of, no, we think it's worth this and we can get it up to here, even though it doesn't provide any financial value to them other than the numbers bigger. And then what ends up happening is the buyer walks away, and the energy to run the business is now declining. And slowly you just see it either close or you take an offer even lower. So anyway, I guess, how would you approach that?
Well, I think there's a couple issues in there, and you've touched on at least one of them. Yeah, ego is definitely a part of it. I want to come back to the ego part. One of the challenges that business owners, because you've said you're the advisor, but you know as well that sometimes, in fact, many times, that price that's being offered is not quite what they need. So the issue is not so much about ego. It's just about, I really need this. and I'm going to insist I'm showing the higher number.
Right.
I need the higher number because that's what I need. That doesn't mean your business is there. And I think so part of the ego is, like you said, blood, sweat, and tears. It's got to be worth more than that. Then we get caught up in what we need. But here's the big thing. Very few business owners actually think about, okay, what do I need to do to get the value of my business to that higher number? It's almost like they just want to wait and try and convince somebody and find someone to pay them versus get the value up. And another part of that is they wait too long and they don't leave enough of a window to increase value.
Mm.
To me, if I'm a business owner, and let's say it's a small business, and let's say I want $3 million. I want $3 million for my business. I want to net $3 million. Well, let's make it simpler. I want a $3 million sell price. Great. Someone comes to me and the best I can get is 2.25. I sit there and go, it's worth more than that. And I want to retire in the next 2 years. Well, if you'd started this process 5 years out, you'd have a much better chance to say, okay, the market's telling me my business is worth $2.25 million. What can I do to make it 3 million? And typically there's some sort of formula involved. You can figure it out. What do you got to do? I got to probably increase my revenue, increase my profits. Maybe I've got to systematize my business because they're taking a discount on the value because it's not really systematized. Maybe the business is too dependent on me because I haven't developed my future leaders. Almost everybody waits too long to work on their succession plan, which limits now what their choices are. But I say approach it early and focus on how do you get your business to be worth it versus hoping you find someone that agrees with you.
Got it. Yeah. But I think you're right. Like there's a tremendous opportunity that I see coming. When the baby boomer generation, I think, are you technically in the baby boom generation too?
I'm in the baby boom by all numbers, but I'm at the late or I don't know which end you want to call it.
The young end.
I'm at the young end because I was born in 1959.
Okay.
And typically 59 is definitely in the boomers. I think the lowest I've seen it go is like 56.
Got it. So yeah,
I'm sorry, I went the wrong way.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the other way. The most I've seen is like it's born in 64, still considered a boomer.
Right. Well,
right around there.
So I agree. It's really, I think there's an opportunity also, even in your business, of helping those business owners come to that realization, whether it's the need to increase its value or the need to decrease their ego. either one.
Let's work on both.
Well, that's great. That's both, exactly. But when I say ego, I should say expectations of, they're like they just have a number. They're like, I think it's worth $3 million. And you're like, you only have 2 million in revenue. How's this worth $3 million? So anyway, I completely see a tremendous opportunity and especially from an investment standpoint of trying to figure out, because the number of publicly traded companies is half of what it was 20 years ago. And that trend is not going to slow down through consolidation. Fewer companies are doing initial public offerings, and they're all choosing to stay private because it's so much better to stay private. You don't need the funds.
Well, and I think that the pandemic is really one of the sad parts for me. It just hasn't hit home yet. I'm sorry to say this, but the COVID pandemic is going to have a long tail because it's going to have a long tail in terms of businesses. Certain businesses are taking an initial hit, but the real hit's going to come 6 to 12 months down the road. One of those, I believe, is going to be commercial real estate. If I'm in commercial real estate right now, I better be innovating somewhere. I talked to someone the other day. We were talking about real estate, and there was a trend the last couple of years towards co-working space. And he was saying he believes that is the place, man. That is going to explode, but you're going to have to survive for the next however many months, still be around when people are going to this hybrid model where people are working remotely but don't want to work from home. It's not working from home, it's work from anywhere kind of mindset. but you got to survive that. So you're going to have a long tail of this impact, but a lot of business owners sadly missed the window because they went, last year and the last couple of years, they went through this process. No one met their expectations, so they didn't sell. They said, I'm waiting for a better time. Well, unless you have think about this. If you have a business that's been negatively impacted by COVID, the fact of you getting back to even where you were at the valuation is challenging. But what if your business, even if your business benefited from COVID, if your business grew because of COVID, some unique product or service you had, that's great. But if COVID gets normalized, then you can't count on your business doing that in the next 5 years again. It grew this year. It's not going to happen again unless you're going to go, I hope we have another pandemic. So it's a very volatile situation. And I think a lot of people may have found that they missed the window.
Yeah. Commercial real estate. I'm actually talking with a guy tomorrow about that. But commercial real estate. I think it's like a pendulum. We were over here with what we'd like to call as normal. And then of work means going to an office. That was reality, right? And then the pandemic hit, and then it was like, I am never going to an office again for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Those might be two extremes. I don't know, but I think that pendulum, it swung over here to the never, and it's starting to come back. I'm starting to read about companies saying we're going to allow work from home for 6 months, or we're going to allow work from, some said indefinitely, but some are starting to walk that back of 6 months, a year, 2 years, 9, whatever it is. It seems like they're setting dates now of, we're going to return to work. It'll be interesting to see if those actually play out depending on the vaccine and all of that. And frankly, people's comfort level. I think the fear is what's been the interesting thing to observe in people, especially on the West Coast. You're in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in Florida. We spent a month in Florida, in Cape Coral, to avoid the fires out here. So we went out there in September to October, and I could not have gone to two extremes. Oregon, everyone is driving in their car with masks on. They're all terrified. It's the governor is telling you, you can't do this, you can't do that. And we go to Florida and everyone's looking at us weird when we wear a mask. It's just like, COVID's a thing down here. This is strange. And so it was really fascinating to see those two. And I think what's going to be really interesting for me to see is the economic impact of that fear, because I think it's going to be pretty immense, especially in states like California. I'm in Oregon, Washington, where lockdowns are normalized now. Mm-hmm. And people are fleeing that out of necessity. I think that the economics of the West Coast is going to be hurt pretty badly, and with that, commercial real estate. But in a place like Texas, Florida, I don't think you're going to see much of an impact. I think
I think you are because there's, even here in Florida, there's a lot of people. It's still very uncertain about what's going to look like, what's work look like going forward. I've already heard from people I know here that people are looking to renegotiate leases. I don't remember the number. I remember the big number. I think it was Twitter. I don't know if you saw this about a month ago. It was one of those, high flying companies. They paid something like $50 million to buy out all their leases. Mm-hmm. They just went to them and said, we don't want any of this space. Not only are we going to have a slow return, we're not taking any space. We're getting rid of, whatever huge percentage. We're just not going to have offices. And, is that going to happen everywhere? No. But I think that I've talked to some people here in Florida who are in commercial real estate or on the edges of it, like developers who said, man, it's going to be a bloodbath. Now, that's not predictive. And is that fear driven? I don't know. But the world has changed. And I think a lot of businesses, this is one of the things I talk about a lot the last 9 months. I'm writing a chapter in a collaborative book here coming out in, I think, February or March, about different ways to look at this time. And one of the things I've been saying over and over is you have to declare a no waiting zone in your business. You cannot be waiting for things to get back to whatever you want to call normal or the next normal or the new normal. You've got to create a business that survives and thrives independent of all of this. And if you're not doing that, then you're like at risk every day. We're all at risk every day, but you're at extreme risk because you're pausing and waiting for the outside circumstances to change. I know I'm not doing that in my business, but I see a good number of businesses who are in the waiting zone. Not
Oh,
here.
for sure. Yeah. And that's, one of the things, it sounds like fear. However, from a developer standpoint, like they're on the front lines, and honestly, I don't see a point in spec developing commercial real estate, especially with, I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's 20%, I think, of Fortune 500 companies are either negotiating smaller leases or downright closing all, what they call satellite locations. Like if you've got just a customer team out in Kansas City that had 12 people in it and you were renting an office, well, you don't need to have those people anymore. Or you could have the people, but you don't need the office. You don't need the physical space. And I mean, even at 5% of the S&P 500 doing that, the vacancy rates are going to be out of control. And so why would anybody build new other than, I just don't see this being a forever thing. The Spanish flu wasn't a forever thing. And this is very similar to that. I see as going back to some normality. And so when I see companies like real estate's a good example of something that outlasts humans, as a product. I see theater companies, like there was an article on this Dutch theater company that's redesigning movie theaters. So did you ever see the Star Wars movies where they had the Galactic Senate and every galaxy was in a little pod that would float out? Well, they designed it like that. So you had like a family pod that was spaced out and there's a big wall of them. And then you had a giant screen. It's going to take 2 years to build that building, and who knows how much to then open up and have it be this weird movie experience when regular theaters might open in a year. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that play out and to see. I'm also anxious to see if you start hearing the phone ring on companies saying we have a culture problem. Our culture has shifted to virtual, and now we don't know how to foster a culture. It's how do you have happy hours? How do you have, things that actually employees can relate to? I think that is coming.
It definitely, it's my message to leaders the last 4 or 5 months, not in the beginning because it wasn't talking as much, but is that you thought you had hard decisions to make in February or March. Those were easy compared to what's coming, because back then you didn't really have a whole lot of choice. You had to make sure your people were safe. And for many companies, that meant setting people up to work remotely. Most of those companies for years had said, we can never do that. And here they are. And in most respects, it's working. But now you got to make a decision. Do we bring people back? Do we bring them all back? When do we bring them back? What do we do for all the unique situations we have? Every employee is liable to have a different situation. What do we do about, here's the thing. What do we do with all the people who their experience of COVID in terms of their family has been positive? They're saying, I love spending more time with my kids. I love having dinner with my family. I love not having that commute, whether it's a half hour each way or an hour and a half each way. My family and relationships are better. I'm happier right now. So they're saying, why do I want to come back? I don't need that social network. Then on the flip side, you got the people who don't have families, who don't have children, who are dealing with isolationism and are depressed because they have no social interaction, and they got that all from work before. The leadership that is required going forward, I've said since March, if you're leading the same way now as you led pre-COVID, you're failing. You're failing. Yeah. Because the world changed. It fundamentally changed, and it's not going back to whatever you want to call normal. It's going to be different. Even the dispersed or remote working, we had a guest about a month ago. This is what he does. And he recited some data that said pre-COVID, about 11 or 12%, something like that, of companies had significant remote workforces. I was surprised it was that low. Yeah, it was pretty low. Then he said they're predicting that post-COVID, whatever that means, I don't even know what post means, they're predicting that it was going to be like 35 or 36%. I thought it'd be higher. He said, I did.
A lot of businesses that need physical.
But it's tripled. It's more than tripled.
Right.
That's, you talking about tripling. And to your point about real estate, who would have ever believed, if you had told someone 100 years ago or 10 years ago or 1 year ago, you know what, people will always need office space. Despite all the technology, it'll never go away.
Right.
They're not saying that now.
Right. Yeah.
This is a fundamental shift in our economic and mindset.
Right. One of the benefits, I shouldn't say benefits, one of the costs of all this too, is I think we saw as a species peak business travel in February. I don't see, I think one of the things that companies are going to have figured out is there's still going to be some level of business travel. It's still necessary. You can't do everything virtually. But I think companies and individuals have learned, I don't need to hop on a plane for one stupid internal meeting. I can just do this like this. You know, all of our systems, all the technology has caught up to make it. I mean, that the thought of us being able to connect like this in a very high res, high quality situation is mind blowing to me, that I didn't even know what Zoom was a year ago. And here we are having a podcast. You and I had never met before this, and it's almost like I can shake your hand. You know, the connection's great. There isn't a delay. It's really impressive. And I think companies are going to go after that. So looking at, you know, investing in airline stock, that's going to be a rough one. We haven't seen that come back. Everyone's hoping it comes back. I just don't see it. So housing is the same, or not housing. Residential housing is going to go bananas because now everyone's working from home, and so they want a bigger house.
So, yep, absolutely. Yep, a bigger house, or I'm going to remodel and create a real office.
Yep. So that, but the commercial, man, I'm so excited to talk to Dad tomorrow about it because he's in commercial real estate, and yeah, man, I don't see that being anything but negative for quite a while.
Well, we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to see. I still say, but it's not a wait and see. I say, let's get into action and make shifts while we see. It's not a wait and see. It's make shifts in our thinking and our actions and our approach while we see. Because you talked about airlines. Yeah, I think you're right. I think business travel is going to be down dramatically. And that's some of the most profitable business travel or travel that existed. Because those are the people who are traveling more last minute. You can charge them a premium. They're not hesitating to pay the fee. They're not trying to figure out the lowest price. But we also saw over the Thanksgiving holiday something that stunned me about travel. They said that Thanksgiving travel airline travel was only down 10% from a year ago. That tells me people are starving to travel. So personal travel is going to happen. But the business travel, I think, is going to take the big hit for a while. You know,
I have you flown this year?
I have. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. We flew
3 or 4 times.
Yeah. We flew, like I said, to Florida in September, and, you know, with I got 2 young kids. And, you know, we were going to see my in-laws, and, you know, they're kind of in that age group of high risk. And so we were trying to be as diligent as possible. My brother-in-law, who's an ER doc, sent us these pretty funky N95 masks to wear. And honestly, it was probably the best travel experience I'd ever had. I didn't get sick afterward. You know, I always kind of feel like crap. Didn't have a flight hangover, as I like to call them. And it was a ghost town. It was great. No one was there. And I know that's not sustainable, but it was wonderful. It was so easy to travel. You know, we could show up you know, late, and no one was at TSA, and you just walk right through, and everyone was cool. Everyone on the plane wore a mask. Everyone was cool about it. They were more courteous people. I hope we hold on to that. especially with travel as things go. But you're right. People, I think that's also there's a conflict in people right now where they've been cooped up. Are tired of being told what they can and can't do. And it was such an immediate thing to happen. We couldn't prepare for it. And I think you're going to see this. Maybe that's part of what this second wave is people just got to a point where they're like, fuck it. We got to just get out there. And, and they kind of just, being worried about COVID wasn't a priority anymore.
I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, I don't think there's any other better explanation for what's happened the last 6 to 8 weeks. Is people got COVID weary and restriction weary and said, life's too short. And I think there's, this is not about a policy discussion. This is not even an ethics discussion. It's a challenging question, and this gets into what is my real perspective. Someone sent me a text today, something I was supposed to do and related to some travel in the next couple months. And they decided as a group to not do it in person, which I respect. But one person's comment was something like, yeah, let's just do it virtually. And they said, my mantra is, and that's what I liked. The interesting word was mantra. My mantra is it's only one day. But I have to tell you, the way I look at life is it's one day. And every missed opportunity is a missed opportunity. Not to say these are easy decisions. I take this very seriously. When I have flown, I've done everything I can to be safe with my mask and whatever distance I can create. And it's amazing how I have these new habits. I remember back in March or April, I don't know about you, started realizing how often I touch stuff. And now I virtually don't touch anything. Like I would easily just lean on a counter or I'd grab a rail or something, and how I would just go to my face. And now I noticed I hardly ever do that.
Right.
Like I don't touch anything. And if I touch, I immediately clean my hands. And if I start to like rub my eye, I go, oh, don't touch your eye. I have completely new body habits and personal, I guess hygiene habits that will serve me well generally. But I think there's no simple answers to these things. And like I said, when someone says people went to see well, I'll be one of them. I'll just tell you right now, I went home to see some friends and to see my dad for Thanksgiving. I haven't seen him in a few months.
Oh, the judgment you must have gotten.
Well, I'm sure I did. No one spoke it to me.
Right.
But that was a conscious decision, including talking to him. And they're going, well, he shouldn't be able to decide that. Really? He really didn't he was going to be alone on Thanksgiving.
Right.
Well, it's just one Thanksgiving. Well, but I don't know if he'll be here next Thanksgiving. I don't know.
Right.
So I'm not going to do it all the time, but there's no good answers here. And if someone wants to judge that, good, but let me have the conversation with them. How would they feel if they didn't see their parent on Thanksgiving and they don't see them next year because they're gone?
Exactly. Well, I think those are good answers. I think I've tried. Have you watched The Social Dilemma?
I have.
It's wonderful.
I didn't expect to get surprised, and I got surprised.
It just is eye-opening. And then I listened to on the Joe Rogan podcast, he had the creator Tristan as a guest, and so you got to dive deeper into all the stuff that, whether it was Netflix let him play or got cut out for time purposes, but you got a bunch more data. And I just think that just having that level of communication has exacerbated some of these problems with judgment. I have a friend who went to see her dad in May, very similar stories to yours, but it was early on. And I have never seen that much hate. She has a lot of followers on Facebook and just got destroyed. And she was even public, like, hey, we asked him, like, are you okay? We will take precautions. We'll wear masks. We won't hug. Like, are you okay? And he was like, hey, if I gotta go, I gotta go, but I am going to see my grandkids. Like, I want to see my family. I'm tired. And he's single. Like, the mom passed away. And so he's just alone. And man, it was eye-opening to me, this judgment that people had. And I don't know how to get rid of that, because it's not serving anyone well. But yeah, I don't know if you could speak to that, but that was
Well,
definitely.
I think it just speaks to, there's not, people want to believe there's a simplicity to answers, and there never has been. But what this time has shown us just more clearly than ever is there are complex questions that can be oversimplified.
Mm,
Like you say, what's the, based upon, you know, we forget about arguing about what's science and what's fact or not, which is a whole nother topic. I met someone on a Zoom call a couple months ago who is she's in her postdoctorate program studying infectious diseases. So I asked her, I said, I'm really curious, you know, what's your response to sort of the public approach to this? She says, well, one of the problems is people assume science is precise. And
hmm,
because they hear one opinion today and in 3 days it's a different opinion, they assume the first opinion was either bullshit or the second one is. A lot of this is evolving knowledge. We don't even know what this stuff is. We're trying to figure it out. So there's belief that we have these clear answers, but we don't have those same clear answers, and some of us listening more deeply than just the superficial. So for example, I recently had a conversation with someone who said this to me. He goes, you know what? I know there's a little bit of an issue, but there's not really a big issue. I'm not wearing a mask anywhere. I'm not doing that unless they make me. And even then, what are they going to do? Enforce it against me? This person's at risk age. That's fine for himself, but I wonder how many people are thinking about what's the impact on others.
I
Like
think very few.
when this first happened, and before there was a mandate for masks back in March, I don't know how many, maybe a couple of weeks. When I went to the grocery store, I didn't wear a mask
Mm,
because I wasn't being belligerent. I wasn't saying, I just basically said, um, I'm technically at the age risk factor, but I'm in really good health. I said, I think I'll be okay, even if I get it. But then I realized, well, what about the people around me in the store who might be at higher risk, or maybe they're just uncomfortable because I don't have a mask on?
hmm.
And it took me a couple of weeks. I said, oh, you know what, Jeff, it's not just about you. And what do I care if I put a mask on? That doesn't hurt me to put a mask on.
Right.
So I started wearing a mask because it served the greater good. And I think there's a lot of people struggling right now going to these quick judgments about others without, we're all entitled to our opinion, but seek to understand the
Yeah.
differences and understand there's not, because if you want to look at the best data we have, it would say that the best thing to do for the pandemic in terms of health is shut everything down
Right.
and enforce it. Nobody's allowed to be around anybody. But there's a cost to that.
Hmm.
There's a cost. How many more businesses will go out of business? How many restaurants that survive somehow suddenly they're going to be out of business? How how much more depression are we going to have? How much more suicide rates are we going to have? How much more alcoholism and drug addiction are we going to have and drug abuse? There's a cost to all of this. There's no simple answers.
Hmm.
I just encourage leaders, especially, to think about what does it mean to have more empathy and humanity and compassion in your leadership.
Yeah. Well, and this year too. I mean, why does all the crazy shit have to happen in an election year? Too, 2008, 2000, I think of market corrections, but 2020, but you're right. Like the thing that I've tried to focus on is nothing is simple. People that identify as I only vote Democrat or I only vote Republican. I have never met one person that agrees 100% with either ideal. We're all weird, complicated human beings. And every issue that we want, whether it's abortion or we should wear a mask, they are complicated topics. And none of us are experts in them. It's funny how we all like to pretend to be experts in infectious diseases this year. But we're not. There's like 7 people on the planet who are qualified to talk about them, and we should listen to them.
Well, but what's even better than that, Nicholas, is not only how many of us think we're experts on this, but how everybody suddenly has a good friend who's an expert. And then I started to realize that people were retelling the same story. And I said, you don't have a friend. It's like, well, I have this friend who's a infectious disease expert, and this is what he or she said. Then I heard like the same people say it's the one story, and they read it on the internet and then they made it their story. So suddenly everybody's got these experts. Oh, I got a friend. I've got a friend in medicine. Let me tell you what they said.
That's the ego talking. You know,
Yeah.
that I want to be recognized, appreciated, and listened to, because I am tired of everyone telling me what to do this year. And so I think I just see it just coming right back out. And I bring up social media because that's where it's prevalent. It just comes right back out as, you know, bullies were bullied, right? Isn't that the true, like, most
Generally. Yep.
people who are bullies were bullied in some form or fashion. And that's where
Yep.
they either learned it from or their defense against it. Same is true with, you know, I was a late adopter of a mask, and for the exact same reason. I'm glad you said it. I didn't know, you know, much like everyone. I have a, you know, a friend who is on the opposite side of the political spectrum than I am. Very much a denier of COVID, that type of conversation, and it devolved really fast because I kept saying, both of us are guessing, you know, that we don't have any science to go on right now. We don't know what this is. We don't know how infectious it is. I see everyone wearing a mask, but I know I don't have it. This was before I knew that there were asymptomatic carriers. And so it's like, I know I'm not sick, so why do I have to wear a mask? And then I think it was maybe like late March, early April that, again, from my very wise spouse, said, you should wear a mask. And then they came out with the mask mandates and everything. But I was a late adopter, and I just don't like people telling me what to do. But the judgment that I got was fascinating to me. It was just every day in the store, you know, put a mask on, dick. You know, I'm like, why? I'm not sick. What are you doing? Why are you yelling at me? I have since made that change, and I felt bad that it took me that long, and I get it. But that judgment I felt was new, because the only place I'd ever seen it was online. And then now it's in real life. And that was very fascinating to see.
Well, and we talked about this early in the conversation, Nicholas. I was talking about this false sense of control. And so many people have been trying to find another sense, an assuring sense of control, even if it's not real. And part of that is picking and choosing information that supports my behavior.
Mm.
I don't want to wear a mask because of all these reasons. And if I wear a mask, then I feel like I'm under your control or mandate. And for me, one of my shifts was to say, whatever I believe, and I, like, people have said, well, the mask doesn't really help. I said, well, you know what? Even if it doesn't, what if it's minimally helpful? You know what? We're pretty much used to it. It doesn't cost me much to wear my mask. And I wear it where I'm required, and I go into stores. I find it unusual. I'll say unusual. I find it unusual that people wear masks when they're out exercising. Like, they're not around anybody. Like, they think this is gonna, like, it's flying from it's coming down the rain. I don't know if there's any possibility of that. So
Right.
I don't wear a mask in my car. I could understand an Uber driver, but other people, they wear a mask in their car. Okay, I just don't understand it. But if wherever I'm supposed to wear a mask, I wear a mask. And I'm very diligent about it, because I don't want someone else to be uncomfortable because of me. And I don't want someone to have a higher risk, even if it's a small higher risk, because of me, because it's an easy adjustment for me.
Mm.
It's an easy adjustment. So I look at it and say, why wouldn't I do that if it maybe possibly benefits one person? It wasn't a big deal for me to put the mask on.
Right.
I don't feel under the world's control when I wear the mask. I don't feel out of control because I don't control it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's that. I wonder what percentage of people have that attitude. I think it's really small.
Maybe.
Unfortunately.
I
It's
know
definitely
people
not
who
the
have it and know
majority.
people who don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's the majority. I mean, I think we all have the social IQ of fourth graders. Boil it down.
Well, that's
probably
because we see that most in practice.
for sure. Yeah. But so anyway, well, I would just want to say thanks for the time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Kim, this was wonderful. This is what when people say, Jeff, what do you like to do for fun? This is what I like to do for fun. We just happen to record it. Having conversations about things that are meaningful are what I could do, like, all day long. If I could figure out a way to just get paid to just have these conversations, this is all I would do.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
so
I
much fun.
agree. Yeah. It's one of my highlights when I started my podcast. I think around the same time you did, right? At the first of the year.
Yeah, we started in March.
Yeah. So first of the year was mine. And I always hated this. I was not used to this when it happened. And I was only doing, I set up my office. I had a sweet couch and all the gear. And, I would just invite business leaders in the Portland area to come in live, and then I did my first one of these and I thought it sucked. It just was clunky, and it was with someone I knew, and it just wasn't great. And I haven't really been excited about doing it this summer just because I didn't like this format. But I'm just now getting back into it and saying, you know what? I got to, like you said, you just got to keep moving forward. You got to keep going. And yeah, so I thank you for reaching out. I definitely am going to use this to spark my interest in doing more of these, because I get so much fulfillment out of these conversations. Yeah, so again, thank you. How can people find you?
Pretty easy, thankfully, to my last name, because you're not going to find too many Jeff Nischwitzes, which is Nischwitz. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You can find me on my website, which is nischwitzgroup.com. And you can find me on my new venture called Cardivera, CARDIV.
What is
that? Cardivera.com is a leadership development online resource and community that's all about leadership development tools for the masses. Most companies talk about wanting to develop their leaders, but they don't have the time, the resources, or the attention, and they don't know how to do it. And the few resources available to them tend to be one-stop shops where it's a one-shot deal and it's a big check, a big investment. And my partner and I said, let's create a resource that's really high quality leadership development that people can access very affordably and on an ongoing basis to get the ongoing training and development. So whether a company's putting their team in it or a team member says, I just want to grow myself, I'm going to become a part of Cardivera. And so we made up the name.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, I saw that on your page, and it explains it, but I think you explaining it there made a lot more sense to me. But anyway, so yeah, again, thank you.
My pleasure, Nicholas. Thank you.
And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast today. In an interest of full disclosure, this podcast is hosted by me, Nicholas Cups. I'm the founder and president of Cups Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor in the states of Oregon and Ohio. None of the topics discussed today should be taken as advice. Please consult your legal or tax professionals if you have any questions. Thanks again for listening.